On this edition of ITG, the Mountaineers fall to the Cyclones 28-16 in the inaugural Coal Rush game. What went wrong? Where do we go from here? We'll get into all that and more on this edition of In the Gun.
You are now watching Believe.
ITG.
With Wes, Owen, and Jed.
I've got the best teammates in the business here, all right?
No way!
They both played the game. They both know the game. Owen is the runaway beer truck known for having some fun.
Owen Schmidt, you have a podcast, In the Gun.
Owen Schmidt, like a runaway beer truck down the sidelines.
Jed is the signal caller who is the X's and O's and the brainiac.
First of all, Jed's research is pretty impressive.
So we've combined those two skill sets.
Skills I've acquired over a very long career.
You are In the Gun.
Once you enter this family, there's no getting out.
In the Gun, episode 200 of your new favorite WVU football podcast. I'm Wes Schuler with the best teammates in the business. We got the signal caller, Jed Drenning, our guy, Big O. He's on his way home right now. He will jump in here shortly. And as always, on this episode of ITG, we're brought to you in part by our friends at BetOnline, the world's most trusted betting platform, the number one source for everything sports betting. Every stat, matchup breakdowns, live odds, and spreads to bet on during the games. It's all at BetOnline. With the largest catalog of odds on everything from football, baseball playoffs, NHL and NBA back, and they even have political props. Yes, you can bet on the election at BetOnline. And when the games are over, they've got an online casino, games of blackjack, poker, or over 150 slot games. So head to the website today. Get in on the action with America's most trusted site for online wagering. It's all at BetOnline. The game starts here. And Jed, quick little headlines intro to get us started here before we break and get into that loss to the Cyclones. But obviously, Zach Frazier injured Sunday in Las Vegas against the Raiders in the second half of the game. He gets rolled up on a play that not nearly as bad. But when I first saw the replay, there was some same church, different pew vibes from Baylor. He didn't get tackled from behind like he did against the Baylor Bears down there in Waco. But it was kind of a similar, he's engaged with somebody, he's blocking, he gets rolled up on from behind. And you could right away on the replay see the grimace on his face, the pain on his face. It looked like one of those classic knee gets caught underneath of you, and it didn't look great. And he was down on the field for a little bit, was eventually able to get off on his own power, albeit with some help leaning on some of his teammates and some of the trainers. They took him to the blue tent. He came out of the blue tent for a few minutes, was actually walking up and down the sideline, was practicing some snaps with Russell Wilson because, of course, Justin Fields was, in the team meeting. So he was working with Russell off to the side, kind of getting down on his stance and testing that ankle out. And by all reports, he wanted to go back into the game. Steelers at that point had a 2-possession lead, shortly became a 3-possession lead. It's the fourth quarter at this point now, too, by the time he gets out of the tent. And so sometimes, these younger guys, these guys like Zach especially, who Jed always says is tougher than a $2 steak, sometimes you got to save these guys from themselves. You got to say, hey, rookie, we got a long season in front of us. You got a long career in front of us. We're in the driver's seat in this one. We'll bring this home without you. Don't you worry. So Zach ended up going to the locker room for further evaluation. We're recording this Monday night. By the time this drops Tuesday, Mike Tomlin might have spoke, so we could get a more clear update. But it sounds like it's an ankle situation for Zach. And that, maybe it's like a high ankle sprain type, if you will. He's considered week to week at this point. I wouldn't expect him to play Sunday night against the Giants. Then the Steelers play Monday Night Football against the Jets, and then they have a week off. So they might use this as an opportunity to really give him some time to heal. I don't want to say for sure I don't think he's going to play in the Jets game because that's still a long way away. But I do think it's safe to say he's not going to play this weekend against the Giants. But I saw Zach on the bus, Jed, and he was in good spirits. He was actually pretty excited when he found out we had In-N-Out Burger for the post-game meal there in Vegas. So I think that put an extra smile on his face. But saw him on the bus post-game, seemed to be in good spirits. And listen, I mean, you know Zach much better than I do, but we know the type of guy he is. He wants to be out there. He wants to be helping his team. He wants to play through injury if he can. But I think at the same time as well, too, in a way, you dodged a bullet, right? Because when you first saw that replay, when you first saw, like, in those moments, you always know those situations could be much worse. So if he ends up missing a week, maybe 2 weeks, bring him back after the bye week. I still think all things considered, it's fortunate. It certainly could have been much worse, and hopefully just a little bump in the road on what will continue to be an outstanding rookie season.
Yeah, no, obviously we are going to, after the break, get to the recap of what happened Saturday night with Iowa State, but we were looking for almost any excuse to start with something else first, and this served as a perfect opportunity to do that because it was very timely. I mean, obviously, we knew you were on site there in Vegas, up in the booth, with your role with the team. I'm sitting here at my house watching it on the broadcast. So I'm not, and you have a different level of access, but I'm not sure if you're seeing the broadcast portion of it. So I'm trying to share our group
Yeah,
thread
you're sending
what
me
the
videos
broadcast
and
is
stuff.
saying.
Yeah.
Yeah, and of course you have a different insight than the rest of us.
And I'm
But
texting you
the
like what
thing
I'm
about it
seeing
is,
him doing on the
yeah,
sideline and
exactly.
everything.
Like,
Like,
hey,
all
he's
right, he's
doing this. He's
snapping with
giving
Russell
snap.
Wilson right now.
Russell
Yeah.
Wilson, yeah, which is pretty cool actually. But to get that vantage point. But what was neat about it was, Charles Davis, CD's a guy that I have tremendous respect for as an analyst. I think Charles Davis is one of the brighter minds in both college and football from an analyst standpoint. And here Zach has played just a little over 5.5 games in his NFL career. And even after the injury, Charles couldn't heap enough praise upon Zach Frazier. I mean, every opportunity he had to talk about it or address it, there was something so positive to say. And I'm just sitting there thinking to myself, this is less than 6 games into his NFL career. What's going to be his reputation 7, 8 years from now? I
Mm-hmm.
mean, who knows? But I'm no trainer. I have no medical background in that space at all. I'm kind of the opposite of that. I'm an idiot. But at the end of the day, we've both been around the sport long enough to know that you're far more vigilant with high ankle, if that's what it turns out to be, than
No
low
doubt.
ankle. So those things can get re-aggravated and kind of linger. So you want to be smart and secure about it, and proceed as cautiously as possible. What has turned into an incredibly critical piece to not just the interior of the Steeler offensive line, but I would say the offense at large. So yeah, best of luck to Zach. He's been through this before, obviously, far worse. He'll bounce back, whatever timeline that might look like is a guessing game. Even you being around the team, I mean, Mike Tomlin's very guarded in what he says
Yeah,
publicly, right?
no doubt.
So,
No doubt.
I mean, he has to first clear things to the training staff and follow certain protocols. But yeah, one way or the other, it doesn't sound to be catastrophic. So at least that's the hope. More optimistic than not at this juncture, but I hated to see it. Just Zach laying. I was like, oh no! As soon as they said Zach Frazier's on the field, I perked up. It got my full undivided attention, and then I was studying every second of it afterwards, as I'm sure you were.
Yeah, so just real quick to paint the picture for you, right? In our broadcast booth, Rob King, voice of the Steelers, Craig Wolfley, of course, brother of Dale and Ron Wolfley, right? Is our analyst. I sit behind them with kind of our soundboard and everything. And then we have two sideline reporters, Max Starks, who's a former Steeler, won 2 Super Bowls in the Troy Polamalu era, if you will. A proud Florida Gator, Max Starks as well too. And then we have Missy Matthews. So we have 2 sideline reporters actually for our games. Missy is kind of the one who is always on top of the injuries and the adjustments and what the coaches are talking about and these things. Max is the one who's kind of really intently watching the game from just a sideline analyst perspective. And so I can hear what they're saying at all times, right? Like, I think you guys are different. I think you guys have your mic live at all moments, right? And you can just turn on and speak from the sideline. Is that right? Am I correct in that or no?
Yeah, I mute it when there's noise around me, so it doesn't disrupt Tony the
Okay.
broadcast. But yeah, it's
So
always hot.
So we do it differently. Like I can hear Max and Missy at all times, but they have to
Yeah.
they have to signal to me when they've got something or when they want to go with something. They can't just turn on and talk. And so in the middle of that, I mean, 2 seconds, 3 seconds after that ball is snapped on that play, right? You're still watching everything develop. And I hear Max in my ear go, "Oh no, Zach." And I immediately look back and I see him down on the field and my heart sank because I'm thinking like, as if everything that transpired against Iowa State wasn't enough. Now here comes an injury to Zach. Like, I'm done with. I was thinking about jumping out of the broadcast booth at Allegiant Stadium and being done with football for a very long time. But with all those, again, things considered, it still stinks that he's injured and more than likely going to miss at least a game or two. But I think you did dodge a bullet in a way. Last thing from Allegiant Stadium, which, Jed, you would love. It looks like Darth Vader's helmet and a hockey puck made a baby. That's what this stadium looks like.
I've driven by it, Wes, but I've never been inside it. Yeah.
It looks like Darth Vader's helmet and a hockey puck conceived a child, and it is Allegiant Stadium. One thing to give a positive note, because you kind of mentioned it too with the broadcast. I'm a little petty. I can be a little vindictive. I can hold grudges for a little while, particularly when it comes to my Mountaineers, all right? So I remember all throughout the draft process last year, Senior Bowl, Combine, Pro Days, NFL Draft, everyone telling me how Jackson Powers Johnson was the generational center prospect in this draft.
Yeah.
And how Graham Barton was number 2, the tackle from Duke who was going to end up playing center. And to be fair to Graham Barton, he's had a nice start to his career at center down in Tampa Bay as well, too. Not quite as good as Zach, but he's had a good start to his career as well, too. Jed, I love sitting there watching Jackson Powers Johnson at guard getting his butt whooped for 3 hours while they were praising everything that Zach did. That was a very nice kind of pat myself on the back. I told you so. I'm petty. I'm a little bit vindictive only when it comes to my Mountaineers. So I did enjoy that at least. Like, oh, wait, there's Jackson Powers Johnson who's been at guard now for weeks and is getting his butt whooped.
Yeah, being deposited by Cam Hayward. But
I thought he was the generational center in this class.
Yeah, I thought so too. I remember when Zach, before he was drafted, and again, no affront to those other two, but I'm with you, Wes. When those two were drafted, I remember I tweeted, that's 2 organizations that will now regret not taking Zach Frazier for the next 10 to 15 years. But more power to them. I just don't know that I would bet on them the way I would Zach. And one of the things I got from what you just said, Wes, the way you detailed that with what happened on the sidelines and how Max said it into your ear, don't let the Steelers find out for the sake of Missy and Max. But I promise you, I don't do the work of 2 people on the sideline. I promise you I don't. I really don't. Either I'm doing something wrong, really wrong, or the Steelers have overstaffed on the sideline. I don't know which it is, but I don't feel like I do. Maybe I'm missing something.
You know what? I want Missy and Max both to stay because I love them both and I love working with both of them. But I will tell you, it was funny when I first started engineering the Steelers broadcast a couple years ago. I was like, "Oh, we're gonna have 2 sideline reporters. All right, I've never heard of this before, but that's fine with me. Gives us more content to work with." And like I said, they've done a good job of Max wears the analyst hat. Missy does kind of the what's going on with injury updates. What's this coach talking about? What's this guy doing on the bench? What's that conversation? All those things, but. Jed, maybe you can use that. Just go in your next negotiations. You say, hey,
I might petition.
Some of these teams have 2 sideline reporters now. I'm doing 2 jobs.
I might petition to get Andrew Caridi down there with me and put him to work.
Go. Now you're talking.
He's really not occupied again until halftime with
now
Antonic.
You're speaking my language.
Yeah.
Have them be your eyes out there. You can always use an extra set of eyes. So all the best to Zach. This is actually a Max Starks line. And, Max played offensive line. He had a significant neck injury in his career. He always hates it when people say, I wish you a speedy recovery. He says you should be saying, I wish you a full recovery is the way to label those things. Because you can have a speedy recovery, but then come back too early and re-aggravate something and it ends up being worse.
Especially with a high ankle sprain.
Especially with those ankles, especially when you're playing in the trenches. So we wish Zach a full recovery, and we know we'll see him knocking some heads out there much sooner rather than later. Another thank you to our friends at Toothman Ford, JR, everybody there at Team Toothman for being a presenting sponsor of everything we do here in the gun. We all know cars cost less in Grafton. All right, there's our nice light, well, I guess not talking about an injury, but relatively light opener, I think, compared to some of the stuff we're going to have to get into here.
Or sidestep, yeah.
As the Mountaineers drop their first Big 12 conference game, of course, at home Saturday night, 28-16 to the Cyclones. We will recap it all on the other side. The good, the bad, the ugly, the emotions, all of that as we roll along here in the gun.
For nearly 20 years, Fortis has been the nation's leader in providing guaranteed roof performance programs for commercial buildings. Fortis offers roof performance solutions that feature extensive initial and ongoing reconditioning for commercial buildings as an alternative to traditional replacement, with long-term performance guarantees that are backed by global leader Lloyd's of London. Fortis offers a comprehensive range of roof performance management programs that provide financial security, extend the life of our customers' roofs, and make a significant impact on ROI. Fortis is currently improving performance and increasing ROI for customers at more than 4,800 locations, with more than 140 million square feet protected, including many Fortune 500 companies that have turned to Fortis to save money, gain financial certainty, and extend the life of their existing roofs. Fortis has helped customers save more than $520 million in capital roof replacement costs for an average ROI of over 250%. To learn more, visit fortis.us.com. Fortis, roof performance and financial certainty guaranteed.
Nobody supports the blue and gold Mountaineers like Toothman Ford. With over 20 NIL deals and counting, Toothman Ford continues to rally behind our student athletes. And it's time we rally and support the dealer that supports the Mountaineers. Not only does Toothman Ford offer the best prices in the state on pre-owned, their never over MSRP campaign on new Fords guaranteed to save you thousands. Drive with pride all season long, knowing you're supporting the dealer that fuels our Mountaineers. Toothman Ford, where cars cost less, in Grafton and at toothmanford.com.
Back in the gun here as it's time to, well, geez, just to be honest, discuss a game that we really probably don't feel like discussing. Mountaineers fall 28-16 in the Coal Rush to Iowa State. A frustrating one. I think I used that term same church, different pew earlier on when we were talking about the injury to Zach Frazier. Same church, different pew a little bit to the Penn State game, right? Just a lot of hype building into this one. A nationally ranked opponent, an opportunity to get a big win in a big spot, and you end up falling flat on your face. So Jed, give me opening statement. Give me where you want to start here. Let's get into this.
Common theme everywhere you turn, everybody you talk to, from everybody you hear. It seems to be relatively on point in the sense that it's some version of missed opportunities. And that's kind of what this feels like. It was a missed opportunity against a very good football team. Missed opportunities in the sense that you, early in the game, seized on an incredible environment to take the early lead. And you were in position to stretch that early lead. And that's when it becomes frustrating when you didn't. Just about everybody I've talked to has some version of the black cloud they started to feel. And you know where I'm going with this. We haven't even talked about it, Wes. At the moment, you can pick either the missed field goal or the overturned 3rd and 3 to Rodney. Either of those. But I'll preface it by saying this, and I said this in the postgame show. What makes it so frustrating is Iowa State played well, but they didn't play perfectly. Case in point, what happened, I say preface it because what happened right before the 3rd and 3 incompletion, right before the missed field goal? A dropped interception in the end zone by Iowa State. So they did this rare thing, a good team giving you a second chance. That's like the 98 Yankees giving you extra outs in an inning by committing an error, right? You have to make the most of those opportunities against those types of teams. And we didn't, because let's game this out. It's 7-0. Iowa State had the ball once, and they missed a field goal. So there's that tiny seed of doubt that's already been planted in them. Are the cosmic forces against us in this tough environment tonight? And we turn around, we're driving down the field, and now you have this 3rd and 3, which even the 3rd and 3, Wes, it's the hats off to John Heacock. We talk so often on this program, as we should, that John Heacock is a very talented, innovative defensive play caller, one of the better ones in college football. And even in that, we had a twin set to our boundary, and he had kind of this defensive pyramid set up with a 3-on-2 situation. And that's why Garrett kind of had to lift that throw over that flat player, that first defender. And that's why Rodney had to leap the way that he did. So I was standing right in front of him on the sideline. And Tony asked me, as we're taking a look at it, or as it becomes obvious that they're going to take a look at it, he said, "What do you think?" I said, "Well, I think I understand why they're taking a look at it." But after seeing what I saw, it was one of those. I kind of felt like you had to go with the call on the field, but you didn't. You could make the argument, hey, it didn't survive the ground. It is what it is, so it's incomplete. But let's say that you persevere there and you converted there before you even get into the missed field goal. One of the biggest things that Iowa State has going for it, and I look to their offense. Their offense has this benefit too, is knowing that you have the safety net of that defense that always has the other team by the collar. They're never going to let that other team shake free and really put the game almost out of reach where you have to do desperate things and take desperate chances as an offense. You can always play within yourself because you can trust your defense to keep the game within reach. So by and large, that's the style of play that the Iowa State offense is built to execute. Well, if you have an opportunity right there to turn it to 14-0, I'm not going to call that foreign territory for them, but it was already apparent even early in the game. This was going to be a game of very limited possessions. Iowa State ended up only having it 9 times. West Virginia only had it 8. But even by that point in the game, it was obvious there were going to be limited possessions in this game. So if you fall down by 14, and again, Iowa State has been behind before. I mean, they trailed Iowa 19-7 late in the third quarter. They trailed last week, they trailed Baylor 14-3 early, 21-19 early in the third quarter. And here's the thing, Rocco Beck, even when he's behind by 8 to 14 points in those two games, he's incredibly efficient. His rating, Wes, I looked it up. His rating is 175 when trailing by 8 to 14 points because of those two games. So he still trusted his defense because it was early enough in both of those games to know, hey, I might be down by 10 or 12 or even, 10 or 11, whatever it might be. But I have an opportunity because it's not going to be a moving target with this defense. I'm not going to take chances beyond what I need to. It's not going to be risky. But if it's 14-0 not early in the game against a West Virginia offense that obviously isn't done scoring, it would seem, if that's the case, maybe you're taken out of your element and you have to try to do some things that you otherwise wouldn't. But the end result is that doesn't happen. We missed the field goal. 3 plays later, they tie the game by virtue of a miscommunication. That's the frustrating part. I mean, you don't see Iowa State make those types of miscommunications in part because they're a battle-tested group, 3 veteran seniors on the back end that drive that whole defense. But it was a relatively garden variety formation. It's a day one install formation. The defense has seen it a million times. It was just the communication piece was missing. And so we were running 2 different defenses on 2 different sides of the field, and they attacked with a vertical route, and that vertical route ran into the night for free. And Rocco saw it, made us pay as a tie game. So even from that point forward, you felt like, from a karmic standpoint, we have something to overcome here. And I want to get your thoughts first and foremost on where things stood at that juncture. You probably at least agree in part with the overturned 3rd and 3 or the missed field goal. I don't know. Do you?
No, absolutely. When that was overturned on the 3rd and 3, I was with you. I mean, I think on certain angles it looks like the ball, is affected by the ground. Other angles, it looks like he still had it in his control the whole time. I was thinking, maybe they'll stick with the on-field call here, but who knows? They end up reversing it. Okay. Then you go to kick the field goal, you miss it. That was the first moment I thought, well, that's a bummer, right? Because I mean, Michael Hayes is automatic. I mean, that's what he does. He has routinely made those same kicks consistently for 2 years now, and he doesn't. But even at that point, I was kind of like, all right, that was an opportunity to go up by 2 scores. It's late in the first quarter already. You got them behind. The environment, I thought more so for the crowd than anything. 2 drives, 2 scores. You're up 2 possessions. That place would have been rocking. Touchdown would have blown the roof off the place. But even at 10-0, you'd have people engaged and ready to go. But in my mind, even when Michael missed the field goal, I thought, okay, that's not great. That hampers your momentum a little bit, but you're still in a really good spot. It was 3 plays later when I'm just, my God, how many times have we seen this year? Really, honestly, when there hasn't been Tyke Smith or Beanie Bishop in the secondary over the recent years. But I mean, How many times have we seen a similar type play to that already this season? Too often against Penn State, too often against Pitt, too often against Iowa State. That's when I thought, oh man, not great. I don't like this, because at that point, not by some wide margin, but it had felt like you had outplayed Iowa State to that point. You should have been in the driver's seat. You had an amazing environment and a crowd that was engaged, and then whoop, all of a sudden it's a tie game. That was kind of I'm sitting there in Las Vegas Saturday night, and all of a sudden I wasn't feeling so lucky anymore.
If you contrast that with the possibility, let's say defensively you swell up and get a quick 3-and-out. All right. Now, that Iowa State defense, even early in the game after just those first two possessions, because they were both lengthy, was already a little bit of hands-on hippish. So if you can string together another drive, now you're really putting them in a tough spot. Even though it's only 7-0 because of the missed scoring opportunity, if you swell up and get the stop there, but you didn't. Instead, you have the miscommunication, you have the blown coverage, you have the big score. And look, to some extent, I can live with that because MA's happen. What frustrates me more is the laundry list of opportunities to get them off the field on third down that we failed to seize on. Because if you get a stop, they were 9 of 13 on third down, and they were 2 of 2 on fourth down. So when you look at it as Neil calls end of possession downs, that's 11 of 14.
That's an astronomical high number of success. Yeah. If you're hitting those at 50%, Jed, that's really good.
You're elite.
I mean,
50% is elite.
50% and you're elite. Yes.
The number that is almost impossible to beat, but not quite. If you look at Neil Brown's record when the other team converts 45+%, that's really the ugly sweet spot. So when you get up into that stratosphere, but when you break it down, here's what this looked like. We're only a couple third and longs, because you'd like to think, well, can't you at least get them off the field on one of those third and longs? There weren't a lot of them. So look at this. There was a 3rd and 10 they converted with an 18-yard completion. There was a 3rd and 12 we did stop them. There was a 3rd and 8 they did convert it. But most of these were 3rd and intermediate or less. In fact, Wes, 3rd and 6 or less, they converted 8 of their last 9 third downs, including their last 7 in a row, 3rd and 6 or less. And then look at it like this. 3rd and 3, 3rd and short's considered 3rd and 1 to 3 yards. They faced 3rd and 3 or less, in other words, 3rd and 1 to 3 yards, 5 times. All 5 times they converted. All 5 times was on running plays. 3 of them was by Rocco Beck. Coming into the game against those circumstances, Wes, facing a 3rd and short when the other team ran the ball, you know what the opposition's success rate against West Virginia was? Iowa State was 5 for 5. Coming into the game, the opposition was 33% running the ball on 3rd and short, converting against West Virginia. So coming into the game, that's an area that we've done really well. But Iowa State, that wasn't the case. Part of it, they got the quarterback run game involved. You got the extra lead blocker. They schemed some things, and it was obviously effective. 5 times in 5 tries, they moved the sticks. They converted. That makes it all the more frustrating because they managed, we talked about this in the preview last week, they managed to do what they always do, and that is stay on schedule. It's supremely difficult to knock them backwards. They had 4 sacks all year, and only 3 of them were on Rocco, and we sacked Rocco twice. So we did a better job in that respect than most teams. But once again, Wes, throughout the course of the game, they averaged 2.9 yards per carry. And yet, in all these 3rd and 3 or less, we couldn't stop them. So they got the yards when the yards mattered and gave up the yards when they didn't matter as much. They made that trade-off, and they game planned effectively. I'm impressed by what they do on the offensive side. It's very similar to what they did last year on the offensive side with Nate Shieldhouse. They go a lot of 12 personnel, 2 tight ends, oftentimes keeping the extra tight end into block to give you extra protection, asking Rocco to make 2 to 3 man reads, which are easy, decisive reads, get rid of it or throw it away. And he's very good at it. He is a very good fit for what they do offensively. And it proved difficult to stop. They stayed ahead of schedule. And then the other thing, they like to go a lot of empty on some of these 3rd and 8, 3rd and 10. And I noticed this on tape as well. I thought it will be incumbent upon us to tackle well because oftentimes on even 3rd and 10, they'll throw the route short of the mark, trusting to make one guy miss and then get the first down. They did it 2 or 3 times at an empty against us. Threw the route short of the mark, made one guy miss. I saw him do it against Baylor. I saw him do it earlier in the year, and they did it again against us. So they're not reinventing the wheel. They're just very effective in their execution, and that's kind of what they were doing against us.
Yeah, I mean, and you use that term missed opportunities at the beginning of of this segment, and I think that it just sums it up, man. Like it's been this team is 3-3 now through the first half of the season. 6 games in, 3-3, 6 games to go. And the 3 games that they've won has been a very similar well, maybe Albany's a little bit of an outlier because it's an FCS opponent, but
yeah,
for the most part, the games that they've won, it's been a similar story. For the games that they've lost, it's been a similar story. And I think particularly on defense, the games that they've won, and let's talk specifically Oklahoma State and Kansas, you forced turnovers in key situations that flipped the field and flipped momentum. Against Penn State, against Pitt, against Iowa State, you turned the ball over in key situations that flipped the field and flipped momentum. In a lot of different ways, it's rudimentary. It's football 101 stuff. But, as it specifically relates to this defense, to our defense, it feels like those opportunities, and it's the classic Al Pacino cliche, right? Football is a game of inches. The difference between being 5-1 right now than 3-3 is inches. But you know what? The difference between being 2-4, if you're not able to pull that one out against Kansas, is inches as well, too. That is football. It's a game of fine margins. For this defense, it's the big plays given up, and it's the turnover battle. When they're giving up the big plays and they're not forcing turnovers, we're struggling to find success. And
it's
I think
combination.
Yeah, we could argue about a million things, but I think that proof is in the pudding. Listen, no team is going to have a lot of success consistently being -2 or -3 in the turnover margin. But I think particularly one that is built like WVU, that wants to run the ball, control the clock. It's a tough way to make a living, man. It's a tough way to make a living.
And what's the most frustrating part about the miscommunication? You're facing an Iowa State team that uses a ton of window dressing. They use a lot of pre-snap movement. They toy with eye candy to test your eye discipline and try and confuse you. They kept running a lot of imbalance and then going back to the split side with it. They were very creative and effective with all their pre-snap shifting and movement, but not this time. Not on that play. This was a very vanilla, very basic. We always call it Rip and Liz. It's an ace formation. Some people call it whatever you want to call it. Twins right, twins left. Your most basic spread formation with the ball on the left hash. It's a day one formation that defenses see during their installs. And to miscommunicate against that type of thing is even more frustrating for everyone than it otherwise would be. I mean, it's almost somewhat understandable if it's a miscommunication against one of these endless lists of movements they give you. That's not what it was. That's not at all what it was. It was a very vanilla look that they gave you, and you were playing two fundamentally different coverages to two different sides, and that made it difficult. And it's probably, let's jump to the penalty piece of it. Okay, again, penalties didn't decide this game. Maybe they influenced it, maybe they impacted it. That's not the point. I think what happened was this. Take, for instance, the no call that Neil argued should have been a defensive pass interference on the interception, the first interception that Garrett threw. Okay. I think even under ordinary circumstances, because I went back and scrutinized that on the tape. And what happened was Cole's breaking out of an option route, and that defender pushed him pretty heavily from behind and knocked him out of basically the throwing lane that Garrett was targeting him in. The throw-in's up behind him, in part at least as a result of that. I don't even know if ordinarily that might or might not get called. What I'm saying is this. if you're not going to call that, maybe it does get called. We've seen some ticky tack officiating crews that would absolutely call that. We've absolutely seen that. But if you want to talk about keeping the strike zone, if you're going to let him nudge Cole Taylor to the extent that he did, pushing him from behind, and leave the flag in your pocket while the quarterback in a close game throws a pick, then you also leave the flag in your pocket on a critical 3rd and 8 on the goal line when Aiden Garnes did what he did. To me, it was tomato tomato. You don't call one and not the other. That's the frustrating part. How are you calling that holding call when it was absolutely no more egregious, maybe not as egregious, or maybe it was, but it was tantamount to the non-call on Cole Taylor? That's what made that frustrating, both critical plays, both critical junctures in the game. But I'd like to answer one question that some people have asked me. They said, doesn't it matter that the ball was uncatchable? Understand there's a fundamental difference between the two penalties, the two
Pass
infractions.
interference and holding, yeah.
Defensive pass interference is with the ball in the air. Defensive holding is before the ball is thrown.
Correct.
So when you have a defensive holding, which was the call, it doesn't matter that it's uncatchable.
Correct.
You see what I'm saying?
Yes.
Because the penalty in their eyes has already taken place. So the throw doesn't even matter because the infraction has already taken place. Defensive pass interference, uncatchable, absolutely matters. But again, to me, if you want to be somewhat consistent and call that type of game, I don't care what type of game you call, just call it soup to nuts, alpha to omega, all the way through. If you're not calling it when he gives Cole Taylor that kind of push to knock him out of place to force that pick, then you don't call it in the end zone on Aiden Garnes when that play unfolds the way it did either. That's the only complaint that I would have on that front, because most of the penalties against West Virginia were, I mean, they weren't even judgment calls, at least half of them.
Procedure,
I mean,
yeah.
they're jumping off sides or procedure. So that, to me, that's the, if you have a complaint about the officiating, about the two least penalized teams in the Big 12 going into that game, West Virginia, the least penalized in the country going into that game. But if you have a complaint, that would be it. It's not like they were out to get us. It's not like it was slanted against West Virginia. No, it was just, if you're going to make that call, then you make the other call. Or if you're not, you don't make the other one. That's just be consistent in all respects. But it's tough. The game's fast. These guys have a tough job. I get it. It's never perfect. I would hate to do it. You'll never catch me. I even hate officiating 6th grade basketball. Trust me, I hate it. Nothing about it is easy. But that's the part of it that I wanted to explain, the difference between the holding and the PI and the uncatchable ball and not. So that's where that comes into play.
Yeah, it's funny you said that too, because I was having that conversation with our buddy Adam Crowley, actually, just about how a lot of people are missing that defensive holding pass interference. But yeah, listen, there's been those moments. We could talk about those back and forth type moments in every game. Like you mentioned, it doesn't matter if it's a Division I college football game, if it's the NFL on Sunday, if it's a 6th grade, Pop Warner football game. Like there's going to be calls that don't go your way. Sometimes it goes in your favor. Sometimes it doesn't. Like, for example, I could get into Jed. Now, it didn't matter because the Steelers won comfortably, but I thought the Steelers got a lot of help from the NFL officials on Sunday. But that wasn't the reason why they beat the Raiders comfortably. I think a lot of times it's easy to focus on, and those were certainly big moments. But, like we talked, it was kind of similar to the Penn State game, like that obvious two-handed push-off on Aubrey Burks right before halftime, right? That gave Penn State a big play and then ultimately a touchdown. It's very similar to that BS holding call on Wyatt Milam that erased what would have been a 50-yard 50-yard touchdown pass by Garrett Green. That could have blown that game open in that moment. Over the course of 60 minutes, you've still got the good teams overcome that stuff. You know what I mean?
They do.
And it's frustrating. There's no doubt it's frustrating. Particularly, I think it's more frustrating when you're at home and you're not getting those calls. It's like, come on, man. Like we're the home team here. You give us the benefit of the doubt in these situations. But yeah, man, it's just another one of those list of frustrations.
It happened. It worked against you. Sometimes it works for you, as you said. But this was just one of those nights. And then when you look at the offense,
Real quick. Thanks to our friends at Fortis for being a presenting sponsor of In the Gun. 200 episodes deep now. I mean, we didn't make much of that at the beginning of the show because it's kind of a sad episode. I mean, Jed, our topics are a 2-possession loss on Cole Rush night and Zach Frazier injury. All right. So we weren't exactly chummy to begin this edition, but 200 episodes. We'll pat on our backs for that. I tell you what. And our sponsors, obviously a big part of making that happen. Fortis has been with us for a long time. Our buddy Rick Lewis for roof performance and financial certainty guaranteed. You got to visit fortis.us.com.
Say this, it's no episode 150 where we have the triumphant trio here with Pat and Owen and Steve.
Yeah, maybe we should have just replayed. Maybe we should just replayed that one for this.
Maybe we should have. We talked about skipping episode 200 going to 201, like some building contractor.
I'm glad you brought that up. Like Jed, we were laughing before we started recording. Like, why does this have to be episode 200? And Jed's like, you want to do like the 13th floor in the elevator thing? Like, we'll just call it episode 201 and pretend like 200 doesn't exist. So we did.
But hey, let's get a Pat White mention in. I did get a bear hug from behind. And I turned around, it was Pat throwing in the locker room at halftime. So it was good to see him down there. But yeah, even when you look at first of all, let's talk about the situation with Brandon Yates. There was a lot of controversy surrounding his injury. There was a lot of controversy surrounding the snaps, and the snaps made, boy, they played a role. Boy, did they play a role. They certainly did. It was double digits, the snaps that knocked us out of sorts offensively. Only one of them worked in our favor when Garrett just turned into Superman and took that thing up our sidelines. But by and large, that was a detriment to us. And people are asking, okay, well, if it was because Brandon Yates was injured, why not put Landon Livingston in? Well, my answer to that would be twofold if I have an answer. First of all, Brandon early in the game had tape on his hand because of the injury. He removed it, and then for a while he was snapping fine. And I heard a conversation between Brandon and Matt Moore at halftime, and he said, hey, since you removed the tape, excuse me, it seems all right. And Brandon wasn't talking like, hey, I'm banged up. Hey, it's hurt. He wasn't even talking like he was hurt. I didn't get the impression it was much of a factor at all. But I think the bigger factor was when you looked at the combination of nose guards that Iowa State had with that odd front, starting with Singleton, the 300-plus pound kid Singleton. They have two very talented nose guards, Singleton and Orange, that they're rotating in and out. And that's really the first time we truly faced an odd front configurement. We see it a lot in practice. That's a different animal. It's not live bullets. And it's a different animal when you're going against a kid like that when it counts. And that kid was teeing off and doing a great job. I kind of felt that had as much impact on the snaps as anything else might have. And I'm thinking, if that's the case, do you really want Landon Livingston, who hasn't seen a lot of live odd front snaps at all, put him out there and let him get a face full of Singleton? I don't know if that's the answer either. He played some later in the game, but that's kind of what unfolded there at center. And that was my take on it. If you want to criticize that fair game, I understand that because of the way it worked out, it was obviously hurting us. But when you look at what happened offensively, outside of Garrett playing some backyard football, we found a way to run the football, but not consistently at all with the stable of CJ or Jaheim. They corralled them. They did a nice job, and there were times that you felt in space Jaheim was that one guy away from maybe something special. But each time, Iowa State was batting 1,000 with, in large measure, reserve backers. They game planned very well. They played us a little heavier up front after those early series than they had maybe to start the game. Putting a couple, and Neil talked about this in his presser, an extra big body type along that odd front. And that seemed to help make a difference too. And then they made some adjustments. It's credit to them. You saw in the second half, Jeff Woody, the former running back for them, did a nice job diagramming some of what they did to flush Garrett one way or the other. But one of the things I noticed was they would bring what looked like, it was almost a simulated pressure, what looked like a 5-man pressure with the outside backers and the 3 interior D linemen. And they would engage both offensive tackles for West Virginia just long enough to occupy them. And then they would back off and do a combination of spying Garrett in case he took off to both sides and watching the underneath shallow crossing routes. Meanwhile, the tackles were unable to help on the interior push that those big bodied dudes were given to collapse the pocket. So that was a nice little wrinkle they had. But I look at it, Wes, and I'm like, despite all these things that worked against us, we came out of the gates looking like a polished diamond, right? But it oftentimes doesn't continue for the balance of 60 minutes, and this was one of those nights. But we did find a way to play. Once again, talk about third down efficiency. We were 9 of 13 on third down. That's championship level football. The problem, this was one of those nights. What about the 4 we didn't make? The 4 we didn't make were critical. We were 3 possessions in the red zone. This was an Iowa State team that had only allowed 7 possessions in the red zone in 5 games. We got there 3 times. We punched in it with a touchdown twice. That's usually winning football. But on this night, what about the time you didn't? That matters. So this was one of those nights, statistically, the cracks between the keys caught up to you. And a lot of people say that when you look at the game, the final numbers, the final stats, the final numbers, they don't seem to reflect the type of game that it felt like because it was 390 some to 350 or so. But the 2 turnovers were obviously the fundamental difference in the game. But I think it's even more realistic for you to say this, Wes. If you remove, when it was a 28-10 game, if you remove West Virginia's final possession and Iowa State's final possession, it was Iowa State 361 to West Virginia 267. That's kind of the game it felt like. I think those last possessions by each team kind of skewed the numbers a little bit.
Yeah.
But it kind of felt more like that type of game than what it did otherwise. But what are your thoughts on that? That says it all.
Like after Oklahoma State and Kansas as well too, but like after Oklahoma State, I thought, all right, we are going to be able to run the ball against anybody. And then after that first drive, we're going to be able to run the ball against anybody. And they adjusted, and credit to them. But it's like there's this ebb and this flow on offense where it feels like a lot of times when a defense adjusts and starts limiting what we've been doing well, we get a little skittish, and that's when we turn the ball over. And that's when we start playing a little too tight. And I just, man, it's just tough to watch. And his name's escaping me right now. Their defensive coordinator. Of course, you and I were just talking about him. Yeah. We were just talking about him in our break before we came here, before we started this second part of the episode, started recording this segment here. And I think he did a really good job, and he called a great game. And you sent Owen and I a great breakdown video where one of Iowa State's former players goes over some of the film and talks about the stuff that they've been doing defensively.
I think Skyler sent it,
or maybe Skyler did. That's right.
Yeah,
Shout out
I
to
had
Skyler.
seen it earlier in the day watching my Iowa State stuff, but
I hear all the time, and like I'm in football circles too, with a lot of people who have forgotten more about football than I'll ever know. And I hear all the time, there's no perfect defense. If there was, everybody would play it. That these leagues now, I mean, more so the NFL, but college football as well too, are designed for offenses to thrive. There's no perfect defense, or else everyone would be playing a 3-3-5, or everyone would be playing a 3-4, or everyone would be in some type of sub-nickel package the entire game, right? That's the thing that bugs me, is it's like when it feels like, okay, our run game is our bazooka, right? That's our heavy artillery. But when that gets taken away from us, like we got nothing else in the holster, and we start to get skittish, and then that's again when we turn the ball over and lose our identity on offense. And they're a good team. They got guys on scholarship too. They've got good coaches, Iowa State. But like, man, this group on offense, I want to see them have better responses when they got to go to plan B and plan C and on down the line.
And you know what's unique about what they do, and we'll see another version with new wrinkles against Kansas State this week, another odds stack defense. It's contagious. But what's unique about what they do is normally, Wes, when somebody is going to commit resources to bottling up, let's say, CJ and Jaheim, that means you're making a concession on the defensive side. So that's typically a game where you're going to see us taking some shots because of what you're exposing downfield by committing those downhill resources. But by the construct of what they do defensively, that's not the case. A lot of it's post-snap trigger, and you can still keep that 3 high shell. And we took one shot beyond 20 yards because of that. So they take that away as well. So as we talked about in the preview, this defense is built to take away the splash plays and force you to put drives together, much like we did to start the game. We did it mistake-free to start the game. We didn't do it mistake-free thereafter. And that's what caught up to us. That's how they win football games. That's how they're 6-0. And on both sides of the ball, there were just so many unusual little oddities that, like, for instance, it was very obvious they want Rocco back to be profoundly comfortable throwing the football. He's far more effective when he's settled in an ironclad pocket, making these decisive 2 and 3 man reads and get rid of it. Now, there's not a lot of advanced 4 and 5 man looks.
Right.
Make your read and get rid of it. Well, we recognize that they want him comfortable. So in turn, we didn't. So what did we do? We responded by, on 30 dropbacks, we blitzed him 17 times. That is way more than we normally send extra pressure. Way more. There were times it worked. There were obviously times it did not. Aiden Garnes played a good football game. Aiden Garnes played a suspect football game. Garnett Hollis played a good football game in coverage. Even when you look individually against each of those wideouts they have, Garnett Hollis, by and large, played pretty well. Aiden Garnes still needs to keep improving. They targeted him early in the game for a reason, because they liked that matchup with Higgins. But we did try and pressure him. It's just when they're going so much 12 personnel, so much movement, they're keeping extra blockers in, not throwing a lot of resources downfield with those simpler looks, and he's getting the ball out. And we sacked him twice, but we didn't impact him enough. And that's kind of what they were good at. And that's one of the frustrating things about it. We tried things that didn't always work. It's not as though they gashed us with the run game. It was a slow bleed. We talked about the big kid from Minnesota that was used to playing in the snow. He was one of the 3-headed monster. He stole the night, right? I mean, that kid went for $100 and all the touchdowns, and that's the kid that stole the night. Carson Hansen. That's what was working. They game planned effectively. So much pre-snap movement. Again, it was very creative. They were outnumbering you to one side with the unbalanced and the movement. It's not even though they would just break the huddle or line up and unbalanced, and you ID it and communicate it accordingly. First, they have a lot of pre-snap movement to land in it and shifting, so that mitigates, or that minimizes, I should say, the amount of time you have to communicate it. And then what they would do is, when you do communicate it and respect those numbers to the outnumbered side of the formation, they run weak. Sometimes they ran weak to the wide side of the field. It was a crafty game plan, because if you compensate by throwing an extra defender over there, guess what they're going to do? They're going to run strong. So good game plan by them. Not necessarily as good by us. It didn't take care of the business that we had to take care of. We had a fast start. We kind of fizzled out after that. And, we were talking about it off the air, Wes. It's like every year we're in one of these games against one of these ranked teams. And since 2019, we battled our way and found a way to come up short in these tight games. I mean, the Baylor game in 2019 on Halloween, that was tied in the fourth quarter. We had the football in a tie game, didn't make the most of it. The Texas game in 2020, the COVID year, we were down 17-13 in the fourth quarter with a 3rd and 1 at the Texas 16. Found a way in the next 2 plays to not make that happen. The 2021 game, we all remember the Oklahoma game. They were number 4 in the country. It's a tie game. 5 minutes to go. We're on their 28 with a 2nd and 7. False start by Wyatt. And then, of course, you have what I thought was disconcerting signals that wasn't called in the Oklahoma defense. Zach snaps it. The rest is history. We lose that game. We know about 2022 at Pitt. We know about last week at Iowa State. It's just, at some juncture, you either have to game plan more efficiently and not leave it to the 4 or 5 plays, which most games are determined by, or you have to make the plays. You have to do one of those 2 things. Either shore it up from a game planning standpoint and have more suitable options in these critical moments than you've had that haven't worked in these tight games, or somebody steps up and makes a play. You got 2 choices, or maybe both. Yeah. The truth is probably somewhere in the middle. But that's what you got. From a coaching standpoint, and from a player standpoint.
It's got to be Jimmys and Joes. Your Jimmys have to be better than their Joes, or your X's have to be better than their O's. One of the two.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Good
right? It's Jimmys and Joes, or it's X's and O's. And there's different examples of both of those coaching types all across football. Some guys are Jimmy's and Joe's guys. They're not going to scheme you to death. It's going to be pretty vanilla, but they're going to say, we can recruit this way. We got the athletes straight up. We're going to play you, and we're going to beat you. Other guys, it's more scheme. It's more X's and O's. It's more smoke and mirrors at times. It's more the mental side of the game. You got to have one or the other when you're, when you're, well, of course, when you have both, right? Yeah. That's when you're a conference champion and a college football playoff and all those things.
Yeah.
When you have neither, that's when you lose by double digits at home in a big game.
The conversation piece is going to be as it should. I mean, what's Neil's record now against ranked teams? 3 wins.
3 and 16, I think.
19 tries, 3 and 16. So he's won 16% of his games or so against ranked teams. Well, right there, we just talked about it. That's 5 games that one way or the other, either by tightening up your game plan ever so slightly, or by making 1 or 2 plays that you didn't make ever so slightly, or both. One of those 2 things have to happen. Now, it's not as though, and we discussed this, Wes, we're not used to winning 70% of our games against ranked teams. Historically, West Virginia's won 27% or so. Don Nehlen won just under 28%, but it's better than 16%. That's almost twice as many.
Yep.
So if you win these games, then we're talking about situations where either we made a mistake, a poor call, a poor scheme, a poor play, a poor effort, whatever it might be, that found a way to come up short. Well, guess what? If you win at least a handful of those games that you found a way to lose, you're right on pace with traditionally what West Virginia's been doing against ranked teams. 27, 28% or better, whatever the case might be. And then along the way, some of those are opportunity for that elusive signature win that we're always searching for, right? The Oklahoma game in Norman, on down the line. That's what we're lacking. That's what's not been here. So something has been disconnected when each year you're coming up short against really good teams in at least one of these games. And you either find a way to, and that's what the staff pursues, better, more efficient ways to game plan, or make a couple extra plays that you're not making, or both. Somewhere in the middle is the recipe for winning these games instead of having these black cloud over top of our conversation a couple of days after the fact. And quite frankly, it gets old. I mean, everybody's frustrated by it. You're in these games. It's not like you're blown out every week, and yet you're always finding a way against these premier teams to come just up short, and it's frustrating.
Certainly is. I think frustrating is probably a little bit of an understatement for many of us, and yet, no, you're spot on. And you know what, too? And we'll talk more about this when we do the preview later in the week. And this is not the time to try and seek comfort or anything like that. There is a lot of football left to be played. 6 games halfway through the season, but there's a lot of football left to be played. 6 more conference games. You can't do the definition of insanity thing, right? Like something has to change, whether it's what you're doing in a preparation, whether it's certain responsibilities and whatever it is. We all know the classic definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and expecting a different result. I think the proof is in the pudding that you can't continue to repeat process and expect a different result. Yeah, but I'm with you, man. It's just, and I understand. That's the part of it that listen. I always laugh when people criticize fans for being too emotional. Like, fan is short for fanatic. Okay, that's what
they're there for, right?
That's what they're there for. That's exactly what they're there for. And I get it. I was thinking about this, Saturday night in Vegas as I'm going back to my hotel after the game, and it wasn't that late in Vegas. It was only 8:30 Vegas time when the game ended, but I was ready to go back and go to bed because I was just depressed. And I'm thinking, you have all these epic, Saturday was an epic slate of games across college football. There were some great games, some great rivalries, some great USC and Penn State was great. LSU and Ole Miss was great. Colorado and Kansas State was great. Oregon and Ohio State was great. And I'm like, I watch all these games and I see every Saturday these amazing scenes across America, all these campuses and all these fan bases celebrating a huge win. And like, I long for that. I really do. I want that feeling for us so bad. And yeah, so that's where I'm with you, man. It's you and I think, and you're on the inside, but I think we say this a lot. Like, we're pretty reasonable, as you outlined. Like, we know what we are historically as a program. We know what we are historically against ranked opponents. But it's got to be a little bit better than this. I think that's kind of like my final thought.
Oh yeah.
I'll thank Johnson Equipment here in a second. I know I said this to you before. I can't remember if it was earlier this season after the Penn State game or the Pitt game, or I don't know. Maybe it was even just before the season started. In this new era of college football, 2.0, as you say it, right? NIL and transfer portal and massive college realignment, and now an expanded playoff that has automatic bids finally attached to it. I don't know what we are as a program. What is our ceiling now? What is our ultimate goal? Is it still realistically to win a national championship, or is that swinging above our weight class when we'd have to beat Ohio State and Alabama and Georgia or Oregon or programs like that 3 straight weeks on the bounce? Is it to be a conference champion? Is it to consistently contend for conference championships and playoff berths, right? I don't know exactly what our ceiling is in this new era of college football. But as you alluded to, it should be better than 3-16 in those type of games.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what? I'm not even so sure. And yes, fans can be emotional, but at the same time, it's fair to say that, look, this has been almost every year, at least once. So there's more to it than just the emotion, right? Uh, I mean, there's some rational thought involved when you're saying, like, look, all these missed opportunities, and that's what's most frustrating. Is let's start with this. You don't show up against these teams and just walk out of the gates with a program that's in these games against these teams. You don't just show up and do that. Hire a coach and day one, he's just in these games against these good teams.
Maybe if you're Alabama or Ohio State,
that's
right?
it.
But
yeah, maybe. Yeah, there's a handful of those. So you don't hire a coach and show up the next day and you're in these games. You build a program to get to the point where you're good enough to be in these games against these good teams. That's step one. Building the program, and not everybody can do that. Sometimes that step doesn't take place, and you don't consistently enough find yourself in these games against these good teams. But when you secured that piece and you consistently enough, or at least you're on your way, find yourself. We just went through a string of those games from Baylor and Texas to OU to Pitt to this week, and yet we've fallen up a step short each time. So you're in the games. Now you have to take that next most critical step. At some point, it doesn't matter if you're in them, even though not everybody can show up and be in them. Stop acting like they can. Nobody is. Now start winning some by making that extra couple plays. In this game, it might have been an extra third down stop or two. It might have been an extra third down conversion or two. It doesn't take much. You've built the program that is good enough to be in these games, which not everybody can do. Now, take the next step. And that's what we're not doing. The next step in the evolution of this must necessarily be to win more of these games than you don't, at least enough to matter. I mean, that's kind of what you're looking at. If you want to play meaningful football, which is what we aspire to, late into November, battling for a spot in Jerry World, that's how you do it. You don't do it without overcoming some landmines on the schedule that are very good, ranked teams, and it calls for beating some of these teams to get there. You can't get there. I mean, that's kind of what you were looking at last year. We beat some good football teams, but not the football teams in front of us jockeying for position to Dallas. That's why we finished 9-4 and had a really nice season, but we weren't really in contention in week 12 for Dallas because we didn't beat those teams. But we're 6-3 league play last year, did some really cool things. The next step, you have to beat these other teams, the better teams that you're finding yourself in the game with. Okay, great job. You're in the game. Now win the game.
Yeah.
That's what has to happen. And as you said, whatever that record now stands at, it hasn't been good enough. Anybody on the staff will tell you it hasn't been good enough. Anybody in the program recognizes it's not good enough. And again, whether you want to talk historically about West Virginia less than 30% or not, we're nowhere near that 30%, 27%, whatever it is. We're nowhere near that mark. So how about we get up to that point, win 27% of our games against ranked teams like we have historically, or just under 28% like Don Nealon did, or I got it right here. Rich won 46%. He's kind of the standard bearer. Sure. It's with somebody that coached in a lot of these games. Stu coached in 4 of them and had a good record. Rich coached in 26 of them.
Yeah, it's a small sample size.
That's the standard bearer.
Yeah,
that's the standard bearer. So get to the 27, 28% first, which we're not near, and then work to move past it. Work to keep climbing. That's what you got to do. Move past these other types of eras or teams or programs. That's what step by step. You're in the games. These are the situations where we would almost beat Miami but wouldn't. Okay? Well, it wasn't enough to almost beat Miami but not. You have to beat a good Virginia Tech team. You have to beat a good Pitt team. I mean, those are the types of things that we were doing. We need to get back to that. And at least at this juncture, we're not doing enough of that. But the good news is another opportunity awaits in just a handful of days. That's the beauty of it.
We will have plenty more this week on that Kansas State game, of course. And you know what, Jed, just to add one more thing to what you just said there. Typically, it starts with these like if you're going to start winning these games against ranked opponents and good teams, you got to start with Iowa State and Kansas State before you go swinging at Oklahoma and Penn State. You know what I mean? The programs that are more like you than the Blue Bloods. It's got to kind of be a progression in that regard. So more to come on that.
More ranked games. Period. You got
more to come on that this week as we roll along here on ITG. Thanks to our friends at Johnson.
Person would dispute that.
Yeah.
Right? No reasonable person would dispute that we have to win a lot more games against ranked teams than recently we have. And I don't think anybody is going to dispute that.
I don't even think an unreasonable person would dispute that.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Except for maybe some of our rival fans. I'm sure they're enjoying themselves. Thanks to our friends at Johnson Equipment for being a presenting sponsor of In the Gun as well, too. 0% financing for 72 months, plus a free loader on select Coyote models in stock. You got to visit Johnson Equipment on Route 33 between Weston and Buchanan. Thanks for hanging with us, everybody. We know from the game reaction and the unfortunate injury to Zach that it was not the most chummy, most cheerful of episodes. But you know what? Mama said there'd be days like this. We will have plenty more this week. Kansas State preview coming up in just a couple days. Phil Steele still on Friday as we roll into our 200s era here on your new favorite WVU football podcast.
So,
He's Jed.
He vanished on us tonight. He couldn't commiserate with us and share part of the burden. Come on, man.
He goes to the game Saturday night and he just thinks his duty's done. I tell you what.
That's right. Yeah.
Being here for the Beer Truck Big O, Skylar Callahan, the signal caller, Jed Drenning. I'm Wes Schuler. The one thing we do ask of you is to be an ear and tell an ear about your new favorite WVU football podcast. We'll talk to you again soon, knuckleheads, here in just a couple days. You've been In the Gun.
ITG.
The fun doesn't have to stop here.
Be sure to hit subscribe and never miss an episode.
If you have any questions, suggestions, or feedback,
be sure to follow us on X at In the Gun Podcast.
Join us again next time.
Until then,
tell an ear to tell an ear about your new favorite WVU football podcast.
This mission is over. It's over.